The hug never finished. His arms came around me, and I flinched before I could stop it, my whole body pulling back like it belonged to someone else, and his hand caught the edge of my sleeve where it had ridden up. I yanked it down half a second too late. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at my wrist, then at my face, and something in his eyes went very still, the kind of still that scares you more than shouting ever could. 12 years will change a man. His shoulders were broader than I remembered, his hair gray at the temples now, his face weathered from sun and years I hadn't been there to watch pass. But it was the stillness that told me he wasn't the same brother who left. That man would have laughed too loud and swept me off the porch. This one just stood there, reading me. "You all right?" he asked first, quiet, testing. "I'm fine," I said, too fast, the way I'd trained myself to say it. My name is Wilhelmina Hargrove, and until that afternoon, nobody outside my own house had seen what fine actually looked like on me. He didn't move for a long moment. The porch light buzzed overhead. A car passed on the street behind him, and neither of us turned to look at it. I could hear Otis's voice in my head, the way he said it every single time. "Don't make this bigger than it is, Wilhelmina." And I almost said the same thing out loud to my own brother, out of habit, out of 12 years of practice, swallowing things whole. If you're watching this right now, tell me what time it is where you are. I like knowing who's sitting with me while I get this out, because it isn't easy. Emery reached out again, slower this time, and turned my wrist gently toward the light. The bruise had gone yellow-green at the edges, days old, layered over something darker and newer beneath it. He didn't gasp. He didn't curse. He just looked at it the way you'd look at a report that confirmed something you already feared. "Who did this?" he asked. Not loud, not desperate, just steady. Like he already knew the answer would cost him something to hear, and he was bracing for it anyway. I opened my mouth to give him the answer I'd given the mirror for months. I fell. I bumped it. "It's nothing." And it wouldn't come. Not to him. Not after 12 years of letters and phone calls, where I'd told him everything was fine, the house was fine, the family was fine. The silence stretched long enough that a moth found the porch light and started circling it. And I watched that instead of his face, because I couldn't hold his eyes and tell the truth at the same time. "Lonnie," I said finally, my voice cracking on the second syllable. "And Tamsin." His jaw tightened, just barely, the only movement in his whole body. "And Otis stood there," I said, "and let it happen." I hadn't meant to say that part. It came out anyway, flat and small, like it had been waiting behind my teeth for a year. Emery didn't answer right away. He just kept holding my wrist, gently, like it was something breakable he'd only just realized he was allowed to protect. He guided me inside without letting go of my wrist, like he thought I might change my mind about the truth if he loosened his grip. The kitchen light was harsher than the porch light, and under it I felt exposed in a way I hadn't outside. "Tell me," he said. Not a request. A door he was holding open. It came out in pieces, not a story. The car title Lonnie insisted was temporary, the way Tamsin started opening my mail before I did. The Sunday 3 months back, when Tamsin set a stack of papers in front of me at this very table, my table back then, and told me it was just a formality, something about the house, something Otis needed for the mortgage refinance. I remember asking to read it first. I remember Lonnie's face changing when I said that. I told Emery about the grip on my arm that day, how Lonnie had said I was being difficult, how the pen got knocked out of my hand, and I never picked it back up because by the time I could, I'd already signed something else instead. An apology, mostly, just to make the room stop feeling the way it felt. Emery didn't interrupt once. He stood with his back against the counter, arms crossed, and got so still I found myself watching his chest to make sure he was breathing. When I finished, He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't cruel either. It was the smile of a man doing arithmetic in his head and liking the answer less each second. A smile that had already decided something and was simply waiting for his mouth to catch up. "Pack a bag," he said. "Emery, I can't just—" "You can. This is my house. Otis is my husband. If I leave without a word, people will—" "People will what?" he said, and it wasn't sharp, just final. "Talk? Let them." I went upstairs anyway, arguing with myself the whole way. I packed slow, my hands doing more of the deciding than my head. I took my mother's brooch before I took a second pair of shoes. I left my wedding photo on the dresser, face down, without meaning anything by it, or maybe meaning everything by it. I took the cardigan Lonnie always said made me look old, out of spite I wasn't proud of, and put it back, and took it anyway. Downstairs, Emery was already on the phone, low and brief, arranging something I couldn't hear the details of. When he hung up, he looked at my one small bag like it confirmed something sad about how little I'd let myself need. "One more thing," he said, opening the car door for me. "I don't want Otis knowing exactly where we're staying. Not yet. He's still my husband. I know what he is." He said it plainly, no anger in it. I also know Lonnie's got a way of getting to him when things get hard, and I'm not giving him the address until I know which way Otis breaks. I wanted to argue. I didn't have the strength left to. I got in the car, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let someone else decide where I was safe. I woke up and checked the door before I checked the time. My hand was on the lock before my eyes were fully open, testing it the way I'd done every morning for a year, even though I knew, some slower part of me knew, that nobody was coming through it here. The habit didn't care what I knew. It just wanted the door checked. The guest room was too big, too quiet. I lay there a minute longer than I needed to, listening for sounds that weren't there, no footsteps down the hall, no low voices deciding something about me without me. I texted Otis from under the covers. "I'm safe. Don't worry about me." I didn't say where. My thumb hovered over the keyboard like it wanted to add more, and I made myself set the phone face down on the nightstand instead. Downstairs, Emery already had coffee going and a woman sitting at his table with a leather folder and a way of looking at me that felt like being measured for something. "Wilhelmina, this is Corinne Costello," he said. "She handles elder law." "I don't need a lawyer," I said. "I need my house back." Corinne didn't flinch at that. She had a voice built for delivering hard things gently, and she used it now. "What's been happening to you has a name under Georgia law. It's called exploitation. Sometimes abuse, depending on what we find. Either way, it's not a family disagreement anymore. It's a crime." The words sat on the table between us like something I didn't want to pick up. "They're my family," I said. "Lonnie's confused, that's all. Tamsin gets carried away. Otis." "Otis stood there," Emery said, quiet, not unkind, just repeating what I'd told him myself the night before. I didn't have an answer for that. "I've already called ahead," Corinne said. "There's a forensic nurse examiner who works elder abuse cases through the county, on call for exactly this. Given your age and what you've described, she agreed to see you this morning instead of waiting on a scheduled slot. She arrived within the hour, unhurried and businesslike, and asked if she could examine what I'd shown Emery on the porch. I said yes, before I let myself think too hard about it. She photographed my wrist against a small ruler for scale, noting the layered bruising, old yellow beneath fresher purple, in a voice as flat as if she were reading off a grocery list. It should have felt clinical. It felt like something cracking open in my chest instead, because a stranger writing it down made it real in a way a year of enduring it hadn't. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. I opened my mouth to say, "It's not that bad," the sentence I'd worn smooth from overuse, and instead I heard myself say, "Almost a year." She didn't react. She just kept writing. When she left, Corinne stepped into the next room to make a call. I wasn't meant to hear it, I don't think. But the house was quiet and her voice carried. She was reporting to Adult Protective Services, giving my name, my age, a case number I didn't ask for. She used the word urgent. She said something about risk of continued harm. I sat very still at that kitchen table, listening to a stranger describe my life to another stranger, and understood for the first time that this was no longer a private matter I could quietly put back together myself. It belonged to other people now. People with case numbers and forms, and the authority to walk into my house without knocking. I didn't know yet if that terrified me or saved me. The woman at the table had a laptop, a legal pad, and a way of not looking up right away that made me trust her more than if she'd smiled at me first. "Riva Latimer," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "I do this quietly. No surprises, no drama, just facts." Emery had explained the night before that she'd start with what I could give her permission to see. My own accounts, my own records. Corinne slid a single release form across the table, and I signed it without hesitating, my name coming out steadier than it had in months. It was such a small thing, signing something because I wanted to, not because someone was standing over me. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the feeling. Riva worked in silence for a while, the only sound her keys and the occasional soft hum when something caught her attention. Then she turned the laptop toward me. "Do you recognize this?" It was a medical authorization form, my signature at the bottom, the date from 6 weeks earlier. I remembered it instantly. The doctor's office, my hands still shaking from an argument the night before. Tamsin, standing close enough that I'd filled it out faster than I should have, just to get it over with, just to get out of that waiting room and back to somewhere I could breathe. "I remember this," I said. "This is real. I signed this." "You did," Riva said. "But look at what's attached to it now." She scrolled. A second page followed the one I remembered. Language I'd never read, never been shown, granting broad authority over my financial and legal affairs. My own signature sat at the bottom of that page too, except I knew, the way you know your own handwriting, that I had never seen those words before this moment. "I know this page," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be, tapping the first sheet. "I don't know that one." Nobody said anything for a moment. Emery's jaw did the small tightening thing again. "It's not that your memory failed you," Corinne said gently. "It's that something was added to what you actually signed. That's a very different problem and a more provable one." I sat with that. It was almost worse this way. Not that I'd been careless or forgetful, but that the form I trusted, the ordinary one, had been used as a door for something else to walk through. "I want to call Otis," I said. "I want to ask him if he knew." "Not yet," Corinne said. "Whatever he says right now, we can't verify it, and if he's not involved, warning him early could still get back to Lonnie. Give it a few more days." I hated how reasonable that sounded. I nodded anyway. Riva was already scrolling again, her attention narrowing on something new, her expression unreadable in the particular way of someone deciding how to say a thing before they say it. "There's something else," she said. "Give me until tomorrow. I want to be sure before I show you." She closed the laptop halfway, like even she wasn't ready to look at it again yet. Riva was already at the table when I came down, the laptop open, her face composed into something careful. Corinne stood behind her chair instead of sitting, which told me before anyone spoke that this one would be worse. "The truck," Riva said. "The one Lonnie's been driving." I knew the truck. Dark blue, newer than anything Lonnie could have afforded on his own. The one he'd told me he got a good deal on from a co-worker moving out of state. I'd complimented it once, standing in my own driveway, genuinely glad for him. "It's titled, 'In Your Name,'" Riva said. "Was, until 3 weeks ago. Then it moved to his, using the same authority from that second page." I stared at the screen without really seeing the numbers on it. "I bought groceries for that boy every week he lived under my roof," I said, mostly to myself. "I made up the guest room with my mother's quilt. I told people at church how proud I was, how good it was having family close again." Nobody answered that, because there wasn't an answer that would help. It wasn't fear rising in me this time. Fear, I recognized, I'd been living inside it for months. This was something else, something that tasted like copper in the back of my throat. I stood up too fast, the chair scraping loud against the floor, and walked to the window because I needed my hands to have somewhere to go that wasn't around anyone's throat. I stood there a full minute, breathing, watching nothing happening in Emery's yard. When I came back to the table, my mind was made up. "I'm calling Otis." "Wilhelmina, I'd wait," Corinne said. "We don't know yet what he knows. If we tip our hand—" "He's still living in that house," I said. "He watches Lonnie drive that truck every day. I want to hear him lie to me. I'll know it when I hear it." Emery didn't argue for me or against me. He just watched, the way he'd been watching most of this, letting me arrive at my own decisions even when I could feel him disagreeing. Corinne exhaled slowly. "Then be careful what you say. Nothing about the documents. Nothing about where you are." I called before I could talk myself out of it. He picked up on the second ring, and his voice did the thing it always did now, too bright, too careful. "Wilhelmina, you had us worried. Did you know Lonnie put the truck in his name?" A pause, just slightly too long. Baby. I don't get into the details of what the kids handle. You know that's not my area. It was my truck, Otis. I'm sure there's an explanation. Lonnie wouldn't just what?" Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could hear him deciding something on the other end of that silence. "Can you just come home so we can talk about this like a family?" he said. "Whatever's going on, we can fix it. You don't need to be running around with lawyers and—" My hand was shaking so hard the phone nearly slipped. "Who told you I have a lawyer?" He didn't answer that one at all. Riva set her phone in the center of the table and dialed on speaker, her expression giving away nothing. Corinne sat close, a legal pad in front of her, pen already uncapped. The notary picked up on the third ring, his voice easy, unbothered. "Sanders Notary Services. This is Walt." "Mr. Sanders, I'm following up on a document you notarized back in April," Riva said, calm, almost bored. "General power of attorney, Wilhelmina Hargrove." Sure, I remember that one," he said, too quickly for someone who probably notarized a dozen documents a week. "Nice lady. Signed it right in my office. No issues." "You remember her specifically?" "Course I do. Older lady, real polite. I remember she had on this blue dress, sat right across from me." I felt my stomach turn at how easily the lie came, how casually he built a memory that didn't exist. "What time of day was that?" Riva asked, still gentle, still unhurried. "Afternoon sometime. Maybe 2:30. "Was anyone else in the room with her?" "No, just her. Real, straightforward signing." Riva glanced at Corinne, who was already flipping through the folder in front of her. The same folder holding the forensic exam records from 3 weeks after that date, and beneath it, an emergency room intake sheet I hadn't even known Corinne had pulled. The date on that intake sheet was the same date Walt Sanders had just described from memory. 2:11 in the afternoon. Not his office. A hospital 40 minutes away, where I'd been sitting in a paper gown getting my ribs looked at. "Mr. Sanders," Corinne said, leaning toward the phone for the first time, "can you check your log for that date? Because our client has medical records placing her at Chatham Memorial that afternoon, not in your office." The silence on the line stretched. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its ease. Let me pull the file. Sometimes dates get, they get transposed." "Take your time," Corinne said, pleasant as a knife. He didn't take his time. He mumbled something about needing to call his office back, and the line went dead before anyone could stop him. Nobody spoke for a moment. I sat very still, feeling something settle in my chest that was heavier than anger and colder than fear. "He didn't even know me," I said finally. "He built a whole memory of a woman who was never in that room." "For what? A fee? A favor for Tamsin?" "Doesn't matter why," Corinne said. "What matters is his own words just contradicted your medical records. On a recorded line. That's enough to flag notarial fraud." "A charge against a notary I've never met doesn't touch Lonnie," I said. "Doesn't touch Otis." Emery hadn't said much through any of it, arms crossed, watching the phone like it might ring again on its own. "That's not enough," he said quietly. "I don't want a paperwork violation against a stranger. I want something that reaches into that house, something that reaches him too." Corinne looked at him for a long moment, then closed the folder. "Then we build toward that," she said. "But we build it right." I didn't see any of what happened at the house that day. I only know it the way you know a bruise formed while you were sleeping. By piecing it together afterward, from what Emery told me once it was already done. Otis had been calling him for 2 days, matter-of-fact things at first, questions about paperwork. Emery brushed off with half answers. Then, that Thursday, the calls turned into Lonnie standing over his father's shoulder, feeding him lines to say. Emery told me Otis sounded different by the 4th call. Smaller, cornered, repeating things that weren't his own words. "You're really going to let some brother nobody's seen in 12 years decide this?" Otis had said. And Emery said he could hear Lonnie's voice underneath it, close to the phone, coaching. I hadn't thought much of the second text I'd sent Otis, 4 days after the first. A small, throwaway line about how quiet it was where I was staying. How you could hear the marsh birds in the morning if the windows were cracked. It felt harmless when I typed it. I wasn't thinking about neighborhoods or directions. I was thinking about birds. Otis remembered it, apparently. Emery said that when Lonnie kept pushing, asking wasn't there anyone, any old army buddy or business contact who owned property out past the marsh roads, Otis hadn't meant to confirm anything. He'd just gone quiet in a particular way. The way a man goes quiet when someone's guessed right, and he doesn't have it in him to lie convincingly. Lonnie took the silence and ran with it. He didn't need an address. He just needed to be pointed at the right stretch of road and start driving slow past gated properties until something looked right. Emery said Otis called him afterward, voice shaking, trying to warn him it might already be too late, that he hadn't meant to say anything, that Lonnie had just kept pressing and pressing until something slipped out sideways. Not even a real answer, just a silence Lonnie chose to hear as one. I believed that. That was Otis all over. Never quite lying, never quite standing firm either, just soft in all the places that mattered most. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. Tires on gravel. Slow, deliberate, not the sound of someone lost. My whole body went rigid before my mind caught up to why. I set down the mug in my hand too fast, coffee sloshing over my fingers, and I didn't even feel the heat of it. Through the window, I could see the car easing up the long drive, unfamiliar, dark, moving with the confidence of someone who already knew exactly where they were going. My chest tightened in a way I recognized instantly, a way I hadn't felt since I left that house. The old fear, back so fast it startled me more than the car did. Proof that a year like the one I'd survived doesn't leave your body just because your address changed. "Emery," I called out, my voice not quite steady. "Someone's here." Emery was already moving toward the door before the car had fully stopped, calm in a way that made my racing heart feel foolish and justified at the same time. He glanced back at me once. "Stay back from the windows," he said. "Let me handle this." Every instinct I owned told me to go out there, to smooth it over the way I'd smoothed over 100 smaller things, to say something soft enough that nobody's temper would rise. A year ago, I would have already been on that porch, already apologizing for a thing I hadn't done. Instead, I pressed myself against the wall beside the kitchen window, close enough to hear, far enough to stay hidden, and made myself stand still, my palms flat against the cool plaster like it could hold me upright. Lonnie's voice reached me before I saw him, too loud for a quiet street, already irritated before a single word had been exchanged. "I know she's here. I just want to talk to her." "She's not available," Emery said. Even and flat. No heat in it at all. "This doesn't concern you. This is family business. You made it my business the day you put bruises on my sister." A pause. When Lonnie spoke again, his voice had shifted, the anger thinning into something closer to desperation. "Look, I don't want this to be ugly. I just need her to sign what she already agreed to sign. This needs to be settled. Today, if possible." I felt my whole body go cold at that. Not talk, not check on me. Settled. Like I was a loose thread on a form, not a person he'd hurt. And some old part of me still wanted to walk out there and make it easier for him to say what he needed to say. "She's not signing anything today," Emery said. "Or tomorrow, without her attorney present." "Attorney," Lonnie repeated, a short, humorless laugh in it. "You've had her a week and you've already got her lawyered up against her own family." "You're not welcome here," Emery said. And something in his voice changed then. Not louder, just harder, final in a way that ended arguments before they started. "Anything you need to say to her goes through her attorney. If you come back here again, that becomes a police matter, not a family one." The silence that followed felt longer than it probably was. I heard gravel shift under Lonnie's feet, an engine turning over, tires pulling away slower than they'd arrived, like he was making a point of not being rushed off. Emery came back inside a few minutes later, checked that I was all right with a single look, and didn't ask me to talk about it yet. He picked up his phone instead and called Corinne, his voice low as he explained what had happened, the address Lonnie now clearly had, the specific words about needing things settled. I sat at the kitchen table, listening to half a conversation, my hands finally steady again now that the car was gone. "Emergency filing," Emery said into the phone. "Tonight, if you can. I don't want to wait and see what he tries next." He hung up and looked at me the way he had that first afternoon on the porch, careful, assessing, like he was checking whether I'd cracked. "Corinne's filing for a protective order first thing," he said, ex parte. "She thinks a judge will grant it same day, given everything already on file." I nodded, and for the first time since I'd arrived at that house, I didn't feel like the ground beneath me was still deciding whether to hold. The judge signed the order that morning, Corinne told us, faster than she'd expected. Emergency protective orders move quick when there's already a filed notary complaint and medical documentation sitting behind them. And by noon, Lonnie had been served, forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me or this house. It should have felt like enough. It didn't. A piece of paper doesn't undo what he's already taken, I said, watching Corinne lay folders across the table like she was dealing cards. It doesn't touch the truck. It doesn't touch whatever else Riva hasn't found yet. No, Corinne agreed. It buys us room. That's all it's for right now. Then what actually ends this? She didn't soften it. More contradictions like the one we caught the notary in. Right now, we have strong suspicion, a forged document, and one witness who already tripped over his own timeline. A full confession would be ideal, but we don't need one. We need them talking freely enough that what they say stops matching what the paperwork shows. That's what convicts people. Not a dramatic admission, just enough holes in their story that a jury stops believing the rest of it. They're not going to just hand you holes. Not on purpose, Corinne said, but people get comfortable in rooms where they think they've already won. Comfortable people stop being careful. That's what we use. She explained it plainly, a meeting back at the house, on my terms this time instead of theirs. I would tell them I was ready to finalize the deed transfer, ready to revise my will the way they'd been pushing for months. Enough relief in that room to loosen tongues. My phone, recording, sitting wherever it wouldn't draw attention. Georgia law only needed one person in that conversation to consent to being recorded, and that person could be me. You want me to go back in there and lie to their faces, I said. I want you to ask questions, Corinne said. Questions you already know the answers to. Watch for where their answers don't line up with what we already have. That's the whole strategy. Not a confession, just enough inconsistency laid on the record that they can't explain it away later. I sat with that a long moment, my hands flat on the table, feeling something in my chest tighten that had nothing to do with fear this time. What if I can't hold my face still? I said, quieter than I meant to. What if I look at Lonnie and everything I actually feel just comes up through my skin? Nobody rushed to reassure me. Emery, across the table, just watched. The way he'd been watching all week, letting the room stay honest instead of comfortable. Then we don't do it, Corinne said simply. This only works if it's really you doing it. I won't send you in there performing something you can't hold. That was the thing that steadied me, oddly. Not a promise that it would be easy, just permission to say no if I meant it. And when I searched myself for the answer, underneath the fear, I found something I hadn't expected to find yet. I wanted to be the one to do it. I'll ask the questions, I said, but I decide when we stop. If it's not working, I end it. Not you, not either of you. Corinne nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting to hear exactly that. Emery didn't say anything at all, but something eased in his shoulders that told me he'd been waiting for it too. Then we go back next week, I said. And this time, it's my rules. The kitchen was quiet after that. The good kind of quiet. The kind that comes after a decision instead of before one. The house smelled the same, which surprised me more than it should have. Lemon polish and something faintly like Tamsin's perfume, layered over years of my own cooking still ghosting the walls. I stood in the doorway a second longer than necessary, letting my body remember how to walk through it without flinching, cataloging what had changed in a week I'd been gone. A different throw pillow on the couch, my reading chair pushed slightly out of its usual place, small proofs that this house had kept living without me in it. Tamsin reached me first, arms out, her voice pitched higher and softer than I'd ever actually heard it. "Wilhelmina, thank God. We've been so worried." I let her hug me. I made myself soft in her arms, the way I used to be soft without trying, and felt the lie settle over me like a coat I hadn't worn in a while, but still knew exactly how to button. It frightened me a little, how easily the old performance came back, like my body had never really stopped rehearsing it. "I'm sorry for scaring everyone," I said. "I just needed some time." Lonnie hung back near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching me with an expression that wanted to look concerned and mostly managed relief instead. The protective order technically kept him from certain distances outside, but inside this house, with me walking back in on my own, none of that applied. And he knew it. "You look good," he said, which was such a strange, careless thing to say to someone he'd bruised that I had to look down at the table to keep my face from answering honestly. Otis wasn't there yet. Tamsin mentioned he was running late from somewhere, an errand, her tone breezing past it too quickly for it to be nothing. I sat where I used to sit, my hands folded in my lap the way Corinne and I had practiced, and let a beat of silence stretch before I spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, "about the house, about everything you two have been asking me for." Tamsin's whole posture shifted. I watched her shoulders drop half an inch, watched something in her face unclench that had been tight since I walked in. "I want to finalize the deed transfer," I said. "And I think it's time I updated my will properly too. Make sure everything's settled the way it should be." The word settled sat strange in my mouth, borrowed from Lonnie's own voice on that porch, and I watched to see if he'd notice. He didn't. He was too busy exchanging a look with Tamsin, a small private current passing between them. They didn't bother hiding from me anymore, because why would they, now that I'd handed them exactly what they'd been waiting for? "That's wonderful," Tamsin said, and for a moment her relief looked almost like real affection, which was the part that cut deepest, deeper than any bruise had. She'd been capable of this softness the whole time. She'd simply decided I wasn't worth spending it on unless there was something to gain. I kept my hands still in my lap and did not let that thought reach my face. "I'd like everyone there," I said. "You, Lonnie, Otis. I want it done properly in front of all of you so there's no confusion later." "Whatever you need," Lonnie said, already reaching for his phone calendar, already calculating. I could tell how fast this could move. 2 days, I said. "Thursday afternoon. Everyone here." Tamsin nodded, already smiling in a way that looked, for the first time since I'd known her, completely unguarded. I set my phone on the table before anyone else arrived, screen down, angled toward the center where it could catch every voice in the room. To keep my hands free, I told myself, though there was no one to convince yet. My hands were shaking too much for paperwork anyway, and that much, at least, wasn't a performance. Otis arrived last, sliding into his chair without meeting my eyes, his tie slightly crooked in a way that told me he'd dressed in a hurry or with a mind somewhere else entirely. "Coffee?" Tamsin offered, too bright, already pouring before anyone answered. "This feels like it should be a nice afternoon. A family afternoon." Nobody corrected her. I let the small talk run its course. The weather, a neighbor's new fence, Lonnie complaining about gas prices, like this, was any ordinary Thursday. And used the time to watch instead of speak, the way Corinne had coached me. Watch first. Let them get comfortable. "I brought the paperwork," Tamsin said eventually, sliding a folder across the table. "Before we get to that," I said, keeping my voice easy, unhurried, "I want to understand some things. This deed transfer, when did we first start talking about it?" Tamsin blinked, caught slightly off guard by the question's plainness. Back in the spring sometime. March, I think. March, I repeated, letting the words sit. That's interesting. I don't remember us sitting down together in March. We didn't need to sit down, she said, a little too quickly. You'd already agreed to it, remember? At the kitchen table, before your accident. I hadn't agreed to anything in March. I'd been at Chatham Memorial in March, exactly the week the notary swore I'd been sitting across from him in a blue dress. Before I could press further, Tamsin's eyes drifted to the table, to my phone, screen down beside my coffee cup. Is that thing recording something? She asked, half joking, but her hand was already reaching. It's kind of rude, having it out during a family meeting. My whole chest went tight. I put my hand over the phone before hers landed on it, calm, unhurried, the way you'd protect something ordinary, not something that mattered. I'm waiting on a call, I said, from my doctor's office, about my ribs. I let a small, genuine wince cross my face, not entirely manufactured. They said they'd call sometime today with results. I don't want to miss it. Tamsin's hand pulled back, her mouth tightening at the mention of my ribs, at the reminder sitting plainly on the table between us of exactly how they'd gotten that way. She looked away first. Of course, she said. Sorry. Lonnie shifted in his seat, uncomfortable in a different way, glancing at his father, who was staring hard at the folder in front of him instead of at anyone's face. Otis's jaw worked once, like he wanted to say something and swallowed it back down. I let the silence breathe a moment before I turned back to Tamsin, my voice steady, my hands finally still in my lap. So tell me again, I said, about March, because I remember exactly where I was that week, and it wasn't at my own kitchen table. Tamsin's mouth opened. Tamsin's mouth opened, closed, opened again, searching for a version of March that could survive my question. Nothing came out clean. Maybe I'm misremembering the exact date, she said. It doesn't matter. It was around then. The point is you agreed. I didn't agree to anything I didn't see written down first, I said, quiet, even. You told me it was a formality. You put a pen in my hand and told me to hurry. That's not what happened, Tamsin said, too fast, color rising in her neck. Lonnie shifted forward in his chair, jaw tight, watching the exchange like a man watching a wall crack he'd built himself. Can we not do this right now? She said she's ready to sign. Why does it matter how we got here? Because I want to understand how we got here, I said, and let the silence after that sit exactly as long as it needed to, watching him the way you watch a pot you know is about to boil over. Lonnie's hand came down flat on the table, not hard, but sharp enough that the coffee cups rattled. Because it wasn't like you're making it sound. You weren't reading it that day because you were already upset about something else, and I needed it done. That's all. I needed it done. Needed it done how? I asked, still gentle, still patient. Though my pulse was pounding hard enough now that I could feel it in my throat, my folded hands the only thing keeping the rest of me from shaking loose. You think I wanted to do it that way? Lonnie's voice cracked upward, words tumbling faster than he seemed able to catch them. If you just signed the thing the first time I asked, none of this, I wouldn't have had to. He stopped, dragged a hand hard through his hair, started again like the sentence had gotten away from him. Dad knew, okay? He saw that page before it ever left this house. Don't sit there acting like this is some kind of surprise to him. The room went completely still. I heard the refrigerator hum from the kitchen, a sound I'd never once noticed in 20 years of living in this house, suddenly loud enough to fill the silence Lonnie's words had left behind, loud enough that it felt like the whole house was holding its breath along with the rest of us. Otis's face had gone gray. He didn't defend himself. He didn't defend his son, either. He just sat there, staring at the table like it might open up and take him somewhere else, his hands pressed flat against his knees, as if he needed something solid to hold on to. Tamsin's eyes cut sideways at Lonnie, sharp, furious, the look of someone watching a partner hand over exactly what she'd spent months trying not to say out loud herself. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my face show what was happening inside my chest, which was something close to relief, something close to grief, both at once, tangled together in a way I didn't have a name for yet, and something else beneath both of those. A stillness I'd never once felt in this house before. "Thank you for telling me that," I said, and I meant it. In the strange way you can mean gratitude toward the exact moment someone finally shows you the truth of themselves. Lonnie's face shifted, some slower part of his brain catching up to what his mouth had just done, his eyes flicking toward my phone on the table, still screen down, still exactly where I'd left it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, 3 sharp knocks landed on the front door. Emery answered the door. I heard the low exchange of voices before I saw them. A man and a woman, both in plain clothes, the kind of unhurried authority that didn't need a uniform to announce itself. "Detective Aldridge," the woman said, stepping into the doorway of the dining room, her partner a step behind her. "We're following up on a case already open with this address. Given the protective order and the notary complaint already on file, we needed to check in today, regardless." Nobody had told them what they'd be walking into. It wasn't luck. It was procedure catching up to a case that had already been building itself for 2 weeks. And it happened, this time, to arrive at exactly the right hour. Lonnie stood up too fast, his chair scraping back hard against the floor. "This is a family meeting. I don't know what you think is going on here, but..." "Sir, I'm going to need you to sit back down," the detective's partner said, calm, unbothered by the volume rising in Lonnie's voice. "I haven't done anything," Lonnie said, and then, softer, almost to himself, "I haven't done anything wrong?" Tamsin didn't raise her voice at all. She sat very still, her hands folded exactly the way mine had been a moment earlier, and asked only one question, flat and precise. "Am I required to answer anything without an attorney present?" "No, ma'am," Detective Aldridge said. "You're not?" Tamsin said nothing else. She simply watched the room with the same cold calculation she'd carried the whole meeting, already several moves ahead, already deciding what silence would cost her least. Her eyes flicking once toward Lonnie like she was already separating herself from whatever he might say next. It was Otis who broke first. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking on the single word. Every eye in the room turned to him. "Wait. I need to say something." The detective waited, notebook out. "I didn't write that second page," Otis said, each word coming slower than the last, like they were being pulled up from somewhere he'd buried them a long time ago. "But I saw it. Lonnie showed it to me before it went to the notary, and I knew what it was. And I told myself it wasn't my business how he handled his own paperwork with his stepmother." His eyes finally lifted to mine, wet now, older than I'd ever seen them look. "I knew, Wilhelmina. I didn't do anything about it, but I knew." Detective Aldridge wrote something down, then looked at him steadily. "That's going in my report as a voluntary statement, sir. Coming forward on your own carries weight with the DA's office. I can't promise you anything, but it matters." She glanced toward her partner. "Between what we already had on file and what we just heard walking in here, That's more than enough for us to act on today." Nobody spoke. Lonnie's face had gone slack with something between betrayal and disbelief, staring at his father like he was watching a stranger wear his father's face. I didn't feel triumphant. I'd imagined, somewhere in the quiet of Emery's guest room, that this moment might feel like winning. It didn't. It felt like standing at the edge of something finally finished, and finding the ground on the other side just as uncertain as the ground I'd been standing on before, only quieter now. Only mine. They walked Lonnie and Tamsin out first, handcuffed, past the same porch where Emery had once found bruises on my wrist. Neighbors had started gathering at the edge of their lawns, the way neighbors do, careful not to look like they were watching while watching everything. I stood on my own porch and didn't turn away, and didn't smile, and felt something in my chest, finally, quietly, go still. 6 weeks had passed since I'd stood on that porch and watched them taken away, and I'd settled into a version of quiet I hadn't known in over a year. Mornings without checking locks out of habit, evenings without listening for tires on gravel. I was back in the house by then, sleeping in my own bed again, though I'd moved the furniture around enough that it didn't feel like the same room. Corinne called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice carrying the particular briskness she used when she had something she needed to say, plainly. "We found something in the financial discovery," she said. During the prosecution's subpoena of Tamsin's accounts, insurers turned over records showing she changed the beneficiary on a life insurance policy 8 months ago. A policy on Otis. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the same table where all of this had first unspooled itself in pieces. "On Otis," I repeated. "Not on the house. Not on me." "You, technically," Corinne said. "The policy had listed you as sole beneficiary for over a decade. 8 months ago, that changed. Tamsin's name replaced yours entirely." She paused. She used the same broadened power of attorney Riva found back in the beginning, that second page attached to your medical authorization. Insurers accept a notarized POA as valid authority for a beneficiary change if it's worded broadly enough, and that one was worded exactly broadly enough. It's the same fraudulent document doing new damage, months apart. I let that settle without rushing to feel anything about it right away. A year ago, a discovery like this would have flattened me. Now it landed differently, more like confirmation of something I'd already half suspected the moment I watched her face soften so convincingly in this very kitchen. The moment I understood she was capable of warmth and had simply priced it. "So, she wasn't only doing this for Lonnie," I said. "She was doing it for herself, on her own separate track." "It complicates things a little," Corinne said. "It means the prosecution's likely adding a fraud charge distinct from the elder exploitation charges, tied specifically to the policy change. It also means Tamsin's defense will probably try to separate her actions from Lonnie's, argue she was pursuing something entirely different and shouldn't be tied to what he did to you directly. Will that work? Not with the recording we have, and not with that same forged document sitting at the center of both charges," Corinne said. "But it'll draw this out longer than we hoped." I thanked her, and we talked through a few more details. Dates for depositions. A court date still months out. Until the call wound down naturally, and I was left sitting alone at the table again, turning the news over without letting it cut as deep as it might have once. I thought, briefly, about all the meals I'd made in this kitchen for people who were quietly calculating what I was worth to them beyond the table itself. It didn't hurt the way I expected. It just felt true, the way a fact feels true once you've stopped needing it to be anything softer than what it is. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A text from Otis, the first since everything had happened. "Could we talk? In person. Whenever you're ready. No pressure." I looked at it a long moment, unsure yet whether that request was an ending he owed me or one more thing he needed from me to feel better about himself. I didn't answer right away. I agreed to meet Otis at Corinne's office, neutral ground, a conference table instead of the kitchen, where 20 years of our marriage had happened around meals I'd cooked and arguments I'd swallowed. He was already seated when I arrived, hands folded on the table, the same way mine had been folded that afternoon, with Lonnie and Tamsin, though his didn't look steady the way mine had learned to. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," he started, "and everything sounds like an excuse once I say it out loud." "Then don't give me an excuse," I said. "Give me the truth." He was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again, it came out slower, like he'd finally stopped rehearsing it. I told myself I didn't know how bad it was. That's what I kept telling myself every single day. But I did know. I saw the bruises the same as Emery did. I just decided it was easier to believe you when you said you were fine. Because if I believed you, I didn't have to do anything about it. "That's the first true thing you've said to me in a year," I said. And I meant it plainly, without cruelty in it. Just fact. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I don't think I've earned the right to ask for that." "No," I said. "You haven't." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer and was relieved somehow that I hadn't softened it for him. I didn't offer him anything more than the truth he'd just given me. 20 years didn't undo themselves in one conversation, and I wasn't interested in pretending they could, no matter how gently he asked. The divorce moved quickly after that, uncontested, procedural in the way Corinne had promised it could be once neither of us was fighting over anything. Otis didn't ask for the house. I don't think he had it in him left to ask me for anything else, and I didn't offer. I went back the following week, alone, and stood in the study where Tamsin used to keep her folders spread across my desk. I opened a can of paint I'd bought that morning, something warm, something that had never once been in this house before, and started on the door first. Long, even strokes covering over the scuffed white that had been there since before any of this began. It wasn't a symbol I was reaching for. It was just a door that needed painting, and I was the one who got to decide what color it became now. Emery came by that evening, letting himself in through the back like he'd started doing without asking, and found me still in the study, paint on my hands, the last light of the day coming through the window, catching the wet edge of the color I'd chosen. "You look tired," he said. "I am," I said. "Good tired, though." He didn't hover the way he might have a month earlier. He just leaned in the doorway a moment, taking in the fresh paint, the room rearranged, the version of me standing in it that hadn't existed when he first pulled my sleeve back on that porch. "You good?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. And for the first time in longer than I could measure, I heard myself say it and knew it was true. Not a door I was closing on someone else's questions. Just a plain fact standing on its own 2 feet. I set the brush down, looked at the door I'd finished, and let the house be quiet around me.